Hey everyone, welcome back to another Explainer. I am so thrilled you're tuning in today because honestly, we're doing something a little bit different. You know, when we think of the US presidency, we almost always picture these stoic marble monuments, perfectly painted portraits, and, polished speeches. But today, we're completely peeling back that formal veneer. We are going to look at the bizarre, the quirky, and the downright unbelievable daily routines of the men who have held the highest office in the land. Because, look, behind all those perfectly tailored suits and massive historic policy decisions, America's commanders-in-chief were, well, they were humans. Humans with some seriously strange habits. We're going to skip the formal agenda today just to keep the momentum going, because I want you to start guessing right now. Who is taking completely naked public swims, and who actually gambled away the official White House dinnerware? Just keep those in the back of your mind as we go.
All right, Section 1, Bizarre Morning Routines.
Let's test those trivia skills right out of the gate. Just imagine you're taking a brisk morning walk by the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. in the early 1800s, and you suddenly spot the leader of the free world, without a single stitch of clothing on. So, which U.S. president started his day by skinny diving in the river? Okay, if you guessed John Quincy Adams, our 6th president, you absolutely nailed it. But what's really fascinating here is the why behind it. I mean, long before today's social media influencers were pushing the benefits of cold plunges, Adams was a massive believer in cold water therapy. He genuinely thought that waking up early and jumping into icy water were absolutely crucial for mental clarity and physical discipline. So he'd literally just walk down from the White House, leave his clothes on the riverbank, and plunge right in.
And this leads us to one of the greatest legends in presidential history, perfectly illustrating the kind of trouble a habit like that can get you into. There was this journalist named Anne Royal, one of America's first female reporters actually, and she had been trying to get an interview with Adams for a while, but he just kept brushing her off. So what does she do? She follows him down to the river, waits until he's fully in the water, and then she literally sits on his clothes. She refused to hand them back until he answered her questions. So, trapped in treading water in the nude, Adams finally gave in, handing Royal the very first female-led presidential interview.
Moving right along to Section 2, questionable office etiquette. Okay, nobody, and I mean nobody, embodied questionable yet highly effective office etiquette quite like Lyndon B. Johnson. It was famously dubbed the LBJ treatment. Johnson was this towering Texan, and he used every single inch of his physical presence to absolutely dominate conversations. He'd deploy this dizzying mix of flattery, intimidation, and extreme physical proximity to get his way. He would lean in so close you could probably feel his breath, just poking your chest with his finger until you finally caved and agreed with him. The guy just had zero personal boundaries. None. If you were a top aide, there was a very real chance you'd be called in to brief the President of the United States while he was literally sitting on the toilet. I'm not kidding. Door wide open, pants down, maintaining intense, unbroken eye contact. He just refused to waste time. Oh, and he also openly showed off his surgical scars to the press by just yanking his shirt up. Plus, he loved giving tours of his custom-built power shower, which shot out water jets strong enough to practically peel your skin off. It was just unfiltered, rough around the edges power.
Which brings us to Section 3, the White House wardrobe. 80. I just want you to let that number sink in for a second. 80. That is the sheer, absurd number of pants owned by our 21st president, Chester A. Arthur. If the presidency had a fashion runway, this guy would have strutted down it every single day. He was absolutely obsessed with looking sharp. We're talking custom-tailored suits, imported gloves, and he notoriously changed his outfit multiple times a day. He actually had a valet whose one and only job was managing his massive closet. But, Arthur actually had this really fascinating duality. On one hand, you have this fashion icon, basically a GQ cover model. Before taking office, he was known as a flashy machine politician from New York. People honestly thought he was just this political insider with no backbone who was going to turn the White House into a tailor's showroom. But once he actually became president after Garfield's assassination, he completely shocked everyone. He became a super serious reformer. He signed the Pendleton Act to clean up government corruption and governed with surprising dignity. Now, he did keep his stylish flair, for sure. He famously hired Louis Comfort Tiffany, yes, the Tiffany of Tiffany & Co., to completely redesign the White House interior.
All right, let's jump into Section 4, Secret Codes and Pranks. So Calvin Coolidge. He was famously known as Silent Cal because the man practically never spoke. He had this incredibly dry, deadpan demeanor. But behind that quiet exterior was a guy who absolutely loved to troll his own security detail. It's hilarious. His favorite prank was to casually press the emergency call buzzer on his desk. When the Secret Service agents rushed into the Oval Office in an absolute panic, totally expecting a crisis, Coolidge would just stare at them with a blank face and say, "I didn't press it." No laugh, no apology. He'd just leave them standing there wondering if they'd completely lost their minds. Now, here's a totally different approach to dealing with the constant presence of White House staff. Herbert Hoover and his wife Lou had this amazing built-in linguistic escape route. Before getting into politics, Hoover was a highly successful mining engineer, and the couple spent a good chunk of time living in China in the early 1900s, and they actually became quite fluent in Mandarin Chinese. So when they moved into the executive mansion, whenever they wanted to have a private chat, whether discussing politics, gossip about guests, or just complaining about dinner, they'd just switch over and speak in perfect Mandarin. It was their own secret code, right there in the middle of Washington, D.C.
And finally, Section 5, Obsessive Hobbies and Diets.
To really grasp how wildly different these leaders were, let's look at what I like to call the party spectrum. Way over on the left, we've got our 11th president, James K. Polk. Polk was a devout Methodist and an absolute relentless workaholic. He and his wife Sarah were essentially the ultimate buzzkills. They banned all dancing, all card games, and all alcohol. Imagine being a foreign dignitary invited to a glamorous White House ball only to be handed a lukewarm glass of water and told to stand there quietly. But then, fast forward to the total opposite side of the spectrum with our 29th president, Warren G. Harding. Harding basically ran his administration like a casino lounge. Even though it was literally prohibition, he and his cronies hosted these wild late-night poker games filled with cigar smoke and bootleg whiskey right inside the Red Room. Actually, speaking of Harding's out-of-control gambling habit, I've got another trivia question for you. During one of those hazy all-night poker games, Harding got a little too invested in a bad hand. So, what did he allegedly put up as a bet and then completely lose? An entire set of official White House china. Seriously. The incredibly fancy, historic executive dinnerware used to serve global dignitaries. He literally gambled the whole shebang away over a bad game of cards. Now, historians do debate the exact specifics of the night, but eyewitness accounts strongly suggest it really happened. And honestly, it perfectly tracks with the chaotic, risk-loving energy of the Harding administration. Okay, I want you to consider one final massive number: 3.5 tons. That is the estimated amount of jelly beans ordered by Ronald Reagan's administration every single year. What is so fascinating about this is how a simple personal quirk blew up into a global presidential brand. It actually started back when Reagan was governor of California. He used jelly beans to help him kick his smoking habit. But by the time he reached the White House, they were an absolute staple of his image. Jelly Belly even created a custom red, white, and blue mix just for his inauguration. Reagan kept crystal jars of these things absolutely everywhere: the Oval Office, Air Force One, and yes, even the Situation Room. There are these incredible stories of Reagan sitting across from British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, hashing out intense Cold War nuclear strategy while just casually passing a jar of candy back and forth across the table. So what is the big takeaway from all this? I think it's that we so often put these historical figures on this impossible pedestal. We expect our leaders to be these flawless, unmoving, perfect monuments. But as this explainer has highlighted today, isn't it their weird, eccentric, and entirely relatable human habits that actually make them truly fascinating? Whether it's skinny dipping in freezing rivers or pressing emergency buzzers just for a laugh, it reminds us that whoever is sitting behind that desk in the Oval Office is, at the end of the day, just wonderfully, bizarrely human. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep questioning the history you thought you knew.